Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 13th of October. Even though my first one wasn't the usual hits and losses, this is a hits and losses video. It was the military aid video because I just had so much stuff to get out of the way first that I'd already prepared. I'll do the geopolitics video later. I don't know whether I'll have time to do a live today. I'd quite like to do a live. But yeah, it's Sunday, so it's always a bit funky. Anyway, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find those in the description to my video below. There are, some pretty high stats in a number of these categories. 1,300 personnel lost is huge. That's the top end of my usual range that I talk about, 1,000 to 1,300. We have seen much higher than that previously, but not often, and it shows that things are really bad for the Russians if it's higher than 1,300. Tanks 9, that's pretty much on a daily average. That's which I think itself reflects, at this stage of the war, a bad day for the Russians. 49 troop-carrying airfields has shot right back up again. 29 artillery systems, actually lower than we have seen, but still well above the daily average. 1 multiple launch rocket system and 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems. 71 vehicles and fuel tanks is a very high number in that category, and just 1 piece of special equipment listed today, or not listed, but thrown into the losses stats. Okay, no anti-perpetual loss stats yet today. It might be by the end of the time I am recording this video. I will check for you. But I think that's a pretty challenging day for the Russians. It's very challenging for the Ukrainians right up and down the front lines at the moment. The Russians may well have started up another vector of attack down in Velika Novosilka, Staromyorsk sort of area, if you remember. That has been an area where there's been a little bit of activity over the last month or so, but it appears that the Russians have been amassing some resources in the Zaporizhia direction, and that is one of the areas that they are attacking. I think that's all to do with the Vuhledar. Andrew Perpetua is talking about this on his live stream, about how that whole front where it doglegs down, you've got that sort of 90 degrees coming down from Donetsk to Zaporizhia, or for you guys it'd be like that, and then attacking over here in Velika Novosilka, that is going to perhaps aid them in taking this whole very well defended area that goes kind of north-south. If they can attack coming behind it from Velika Novosilka, then that could be all part of that same general plan there. So it could be a bit of clever military work there from the Russians, although it does involve just throwing themselves against the Ukrainians in very suicidal attacks very often, but still they get the gains that they want. Now, Russia has been engaged in more war crimes. There is evidence that they have executed another 9 Ukrainian POWs. I'm going to have a rant on Facebook, I think, later about both-sidesism. I know some people on there, they're all like, oh, it's terrible, war should stop, and people are dying on both sides. It's like, yeah, they are. There's only one set of people that can stop this right now, and that is Russia, by pulling out of the country they've invaded. There's only one country that's invaded. There's only one country that has committed war crimes on systematic and institutionalized bases that have led to the deaths of countless civilians as well as military personnel in illegal manners. There's only one side that is throwing ordnance after ordnance into civilian infrastructure on a nightly basis, on a daily basis. And I could go on. You get the point. There's no both-sidesism here. It's just completely, all you do when you come up with this kind of both sides approach is you end up appeasing Russia. And actually, we had someone vying for president of the US recently saying there needs to be a negotiation that needs to be fair for both sides. Absolute bollocks. Like, the only fairness for Russia needs to be the justice that they deserve. It needs to be just desserts. Not a kind of fairness that looks at, oh, poor Russia. We want them to be all right after this war that they started, that they have carried out with a disgraceful approach to humanity, breaking every kind of war crime rule that you can poke a hairy stick at. It annoys me. Anyway, here is further evidence of how degraded the Russian moral military compass is. military moral compass. Okay, right. Yesterday there was the loss of the F-16. Sorry, rewind. Loss of the Su-34 jet that was shot down. Jimmy Russian says extremely significant if confirmed. So the claim initially was that an F-16 shot down a Russian fighter jet. We still don't know, by the way. And I gave you 3 options. Actually, it could be 4 options. So it could be 1, pilot error. 2, friendly fire. I dismissed friendly fire only because the Russians were all claiming it was shot down by Ukrainians. So 1, mistake. 2, friendly fire. 3, shot down by an F-16 or another plane, but F-16 probably. And 4, air defense. So something like a Patriot system. And if it was an F-16 or another plane or a Patriot, that's really good news because that's the Ukrainians being a little bit risky or having really good capabilities in terms of missiles. So what Jimmy Russian here says, extremely significant if confirmed, would indicate Ukraine has been supplied longer range versions of the AIM-120 AMRAAM air-to-air missile than previously believed. Now, I got muddled up yesterday because I was reading the Russian here, this Russian, I wasn't reading it in Russian, but they were talking about shot down from enemy territory, as in the F-16 was in enemy territory, and I just mistakenly read that as in Russian territory, but actually it's written from a Russian point of view. So the claim was that the Ukrainian fighter jet was in Ukrainian airspace and shot down the Russian plane 50 kilometers behind the contact line, which means that the range for this air-to-air missile must have been really, really impressive. As I read you yesterday, our Su-34 was shot down, the crew was killed, so both crew were killed. Plane was shot down during the dropping of the FAB from the UNPK, approximately 50 kilometers from the front line. Su-34 was apparently shot down by an F-16, which was over enemy-controlled territory. So I got that wrong. That means Ukrainian territory. And that's really even more impressive. There will be more such losses soon. NATO has sent F-16s out to hunt. Now there will be fewer FABs flying at the Ukrainians. Consequently, our infantry will suffer. Okay, so this will have an impact on, no matter what shot it down, this will have an impact on the front lines to some degree. These are these are aircraft that are carrying those really deadly guided glide bombs that the Ukrainians have very little answer for. But if it's shot down by an F-16, that's incredibly important. And we have F-16s being used much more riskily and being used kind of offensively. Now, Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute, who's an expert in aircraft and the war in Ukraine, he wrote that actually it's much more likely it's a Patriot PAC-2 system that shot it down. That was his, but then, you know, he knows as much as anyone. These are just rumors floating around. And what's really interesting is that, you know, Russian channels already claiming it was an F-16 that shot down the Russian fighter jet. So that's no reports talking about that yesterday. And then you had fighter bomber, the Russian, fairly accurate, possibly actually a pilot in the Russian VKS, claiming that both pilots died. Just a very short, what is it, something like Sky as Earth or something, Eternal Flight Brothers or something, whatever. So the idea is that both pilots died. But then we started hearing different things. So War Translated, and this could be a bit of damage control in the information spaces by the Russians, because what happened yesterday is there was all this talk about F-16s, and everyone like, way, and then the Russians are initially saying that because sometimes they like escalating things as well, so it gives them permission to escalate. But actually, this was kind of like made the Ukrainians look a bit good. So I think there might be a bit of trying to reclaim superiority in the information spaces, rather like the airspace. Okay, so War Translated here says Russian propagandists immediately started denying it when reports surfaced that yesterday's Su-34 might be shot down by an F-16 fighter bomber, called the plane trash, and in the very next sentence admits that Russian pilots are going all out to shoot down at least one F-16, often taking risks and violating instructions. Moreover, it turns out that most Russian aircraft are lost due to equipment failures and crew inexperience. So it could be that they are now trying to say, and we heard this before, we heard this when the A-50s were shot down around, well, sort of Mariupol area. There's one over the Sea of Azov over the other side there, and etc., etc. If you remember those big radar planes, like the AWACS planes, they were shot down, and the initial claims from the Russians were this was our friendly fire from our own air defense systems. They prefer a Russian cock-up to a Ukrainian, or even, as they would say, a NATO success. They'd much rather things went bad because they made crappy mistakes than the enemy were good. So remember that. They will always do that kind of manipulation of the information space. So here is his claim. Nobody shot down Alpha 234, especially not the piss-stained F-16, with cowards at the controls, which everyone has been hunting since it appeared in Ukraine. To me, that's just straight away, this is like, okay. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know if it's F-16 or if it's air defense. But I'm telling you, this is definitely trying to control the information. Our fighters, in attempts to reach it, often violate all existing instructions and directives, and only the persuasion of the OBU command post and KP control post pulls them out of risky approaches for an attack. The Ukrainians know this very well, so the F-16 fly exclusively for TikToks, practically not participating in combat, at most trying to ram another Garan drone, that's the Shahid, deep in the rear. This is just the reality. Our aircraft fight, but we don't always lose them to enemy fire or friendly fire. In most cases, equipment and crews are lost due to malfunctions, incorrect crew actions, or spatial disorientation. So he says in most cases here. Of course, he doesn't actually make the claim about this situation. Yeah. Sometimes planes and helicopters have to attack and evade enemy missiles, seeing nothing but their instruments, which don't always provide accurate information. In other words, if they are shot down by missiles, it's because of the fault of the instruments, not the fault of the pilots, right? At night, in clouds, at high speeds, and under heavy G-forces, not all of our crews are aces. We have young pilots, recent graduates, some who are inadequately trained or not trained at all. There are also many other factors that can lead to a plane or helicopter crash. Just blaming everything now. It's like, well, it could be that actually the bloody leaders up there aren't putting enough work into training our pilots, or this or that. But definitely not, at all times, not giving credibility to the enemy. So this cannot be a success for the Ukrainians. It has to be somehow us being crap, whether it's the weather or the instruments or the poor lack of training or friendly fire or just a simple malfunction, whatever. Like, that's much more likely than the Ukrainians actually doing something good. Interesting. I have no cast iron opinion on how that plane went down. It could have been any one of those four. Really, it's great that plane went down and both pilots were lost in terms of, the military outcome of that. It would be, I think, better if an F-16 had done it, or air defense. Actually, I think both of those really are good news for Ukraine. Right, now we're going to move on to Covert Cabal's new video about multiple launch rocket systems stockpiles, deep storage stockpiles in Russia.
We've identified 22 different storage bases that held MLRS before the war began. These held a total of 1,474 systems. Today, just 10 bases have any remaining, and the largest, the 109th, accounts for roughly 50% of all stored MLRS. And we got real lucky being able to get a really recent image of the base from this month, especially since it's the largest. Of the 517 that were here pre-war, only 169 remain today. You can see large sections mostly gone, and here MLRS have been replaced mostly with towed artillery. Another important one is the 8th. This is the second largest today, with just 54. Before the war began, there were 146, and the latest imagery we could get was from over a year ago. We tried hard to get newer, but no luck. So in the time since, it's likely dropped even more than that. And really, those are the only two important bases. They alone consist of nearly 2/3 of all remaining MLRS. A couple others that are now completely empty by contrast: Novaya Stanitsa, the 22 BM-21s that were here pre-war have now disappeared. Another is Lesnoy Gorodok. This had 76, but now 0 remain. This base has a wide mix of vehicles, and it can be hard to differentiate between trucks and transloaders from MLRS, but I'll get to that later. The BM-27s here, though, are much easier to ID, and now only the support vehicles and those that have had their rocket pods removed remain. So, in grand total, they have just 339 MLRS remaining in storage. That's a huge drop from the pre-war 1,474. So just 23% remain, and those that do remain are almost all likely in poor condition as well, some worse than others. So at this point, they are realistically quickly approaching 0. And then here is the breakdown by type.
So and I'll leave it there. You go and watch the original. I don't want to just nick all his ideas and video here. Please go and watch Covert Cabal's video. It's excellent, as ever. And the work that he, High Marsden, and John P. do, behind the scenes, and also that they explain on Twitter, absolutely excellent. Now, this is really important. And he goes on to talk about the construction, the manufacturing capacity for these systems. And most of that is refurbishing old ones. The building of brand new ones is very limited. Basically no MLRS left effectively. What there is left is probably cannibalized and very poor condition. This is, I think, a case of starting to get to critical points for them, and this is why you see the Russians going to North Korea and Iran, cap in hand, desperately for anything they can get, humans, ammunition, and you're probably going to start seeing machines soon. We have seen some armored vehicles come from China. That's particularly worrying. If China step in and help, then this is a properly expanded war, and we're in a lot of trouble. Really interesting data there coming from Covert Cabal. Now, this is an insane bit of footage. It's a gas station exploding in Grozny in the Chechen Republic. I don't know if it tells us anything about anything, but honestly, go and find this on the internet. It is incredible, and it can be seen from all sorts of different angles. Interesting, it's not the first one. Another one exploded just the other week, and I reported that in Makhachkala in Dagestan. It took the lives of 13 people in September. But this, just an insane explosion of a gas station, a petrol station in Chechnya. Now, I will excerpt a little bit of this in my video on geopolitics, but in the meantime, I'd go and watch the one from Times Radio where they talk to who is it they speak to? Diane Francis on her she's imparting her knowledge on what's going on in the sort of Caucasus area, and she's talking about Chechnya particularly, and how there are all these issues. I've been reporting the last couple of days, there are these kind of feuds, almost like clan feuds between people in Ingushetia and Dagestan and Chechnya, and actually that this could be really troubling for the Russians. The title of the video is Russian Federation on the brink of collapse as Chechen leader incites blood feud. Now, I don't know if that's a little bit too rhetorically carefree, but fascinating video talking about that. So when you start seeing things blowing up in Chechnya and issues happening, all feeds into discontent and hardship in these places that then can lead to a breakup of the Russian Federation, potentially. Anyway, right, moving on. Ukrainian air defense shot down last night 31 out of 68 Shahid drones. So a big wave of drones attacking. 68 is a big number, and you're thinking, 31's a lot. Is not a lot. That's less than half of the drones. But I've been talking about the place that electronic warfare is playing in the loss of Russian Shahids. 31 shot down, intercepted, 36 taken out by electronic warfare. That is 67. 67 out of 68 Russian Shahids lost, and most of them due to electronic warfare. That is incredibly impressive, if it's true, of course. 0 out of 2 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, 0 out of 2 Kh-59 missiles. So 4 missiles sent overnight. I don't know where they went. I know nothing about any strikes, and that one Shahid that did get through, don't know what happened with that. But anyway, on the other hand, Russians claim to have shot down 13 Ukrainian drones overnight in Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk. So just over the northern border, all of those 3 oblasts north of the Ukrainian border into Russia there. Don't know if anything happened particularly, right? So a relatively quiet night in terms of news coming out of long distance strikes. Now, Fyodosia oil depot that we have talked about for the last 3 or 4 days, it appears that a new satellite photo shows 12 fuel tanks were effective, 8 completely burned out, various buildings were also badly damaged. So that is in a lot of trouble. And some of these ones that would be right next to the burned out tanks will probably have metallurgical issues. These might not be functional either. So the heat damage isn't just a case of anyone that's white there is fine, and it's the burnt out ones that are the problems. There could be further heat damage caused a little further afield there. Now, fascinating. Flash News says Poland plans to open an American air defense base to intercept Russian missiles in case of an attack, says Foreign Minister Radoslav Sikorski. So I think this is prepping for an attack on Poland rather than an attack in Ukraine. The Aegis Ashore base, the concept of which has undergone changes due to the war in Ukraine, will be officially opened in the coming weeks. It's located 165 kilometers from the border with Russia. But here we're seeing a gradual reaction of NATO and European forces against Russia. Russia have shot themselves in the foot with this whole war. Everyone else seems to be, making, putting plans in place to further combat the threat of Russia attacking. Now, as mentioned, Russian soldiers shot 9 Ukrainian prisoners of war in the Kursk region, according to deep state citing sources. According to them, the war crime took place on October the 10th in Zleny Shliach village in Kursk region. Drone operators were among the murdered prisoners. Such actions were a gross violation of the Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. The international community should not turn a blind eye to such crimes, said the Ukrainian ombudsman. Terrible. What happens as a result of this in the Western world, in the Western media, and in the reaction of the West? Not a lot. It's been so normalized. It's depressing. More bad news at the front, says Tim White. Almost everyone wrote about Russia's massing of troops and a likely attack in Zaporizhia. Ukraine's army said defences are good. However, despite time to prepare, defences were breached again, and Russia was advancing in Levadna, marked on the map there. So that appears to be in that Velika Novosilka area where you've got, I think that's Staromyorsky and Uruzhainy there, and this is further to the west at Levadny. So a bit of a problem for the Ukrainians there. No report says Russian forces launched an offensive in Velika Novosilka axis, Zaporizhia region, and have reportedly made some advances, according to Vanek Nikolaev, well-regarded Ukrainian correspondent. The Velika Novosilka axis was one of the directions in which Ukraine launched its summer 2023 offensive and managed to recapture territory. He compared the situation to the events in Vovchansk, Kharkiv region in May, where, despite the reports of being ready, it turned out they were not. Currently, Russian forces have reportedly advanced towards the settlements of Levadne and Novodorivka. Now, I don't know yet how serious this is, but certainly a worry for the Ukrainians. The Russians pushing, bleeding everywhere, and that's after saying they can't have much left in the tank. Really, what is this? It's incredible that they are just pushing all over the shop. Right, Russian fighter jets have likely left Belarus, according to a monitoring group. So if you remember, 2 Russian MiG-31K jets who can fire the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles have been flown into Belarus, and I was talking about how that kind of expands the war, and Belarus will be complicit in the war in a much more official manner if they were operating from there. And I don't know whether it's because everyone knew this and everyone was talking about it. Goodness me, if you've got a YouTuber talking about this on Tinternet from his room on the south coast of the UK, then everyone knows about this, right? So the Belarusians are probably like, yeah, not too keen on you using these planes from here because we'll get sucked into the war in a much more formal manner. And so now they've disappeared, gone back, one presumes, to Russia. Now, I don't know whether that was because of everyone knowing about it, but it is kind of weird to move to flying, operational MiG-31Ks to Belarus. You don't do that for like, do you fancy going for a coffee in Belarus? Yeah. How should we get there? Should we take the MiG-31Ks? What, the ones that are due for a mission tonight? Yeah. We just, no one will know. We take a couple of them, a bunch of us, we'll go and we can grab a drink in Minsk. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's do it. Guys, where are those 2 jets? Bugger, we've been found out. Quick, get back. It's never going to happen. So there must be some more meaningful reason for them moving there, and then to suddenly go back again makes it look like there was a real change of heart. Anyway, it's me speculating. Right, advisor to the head of Zelensky's office has said the Ukrainians in the coming days will see, so the Ukrainian population will see the victory plan to force Russia to peace. So it looks like the victory plan is going to be publicly known. Ukraine's victory plan will be presented to the public in the coming days, says the advisor to the president, Mikhailo Podolyak. Interesting. And as I said previously, are we entering the end phase of the war? Which kind of moving to this different phase of like, here's a plan to finish it. If we execute this plan, Russia will be in this position, X and Y will happen. Eurominded Press reports that Russia's illicit use of Starlink, this irritates me so much. Starlink increases Russian effectiveness, according to Ukrainian soldiers reporting. Russian forces have obtained Starlink terminals through a black market, enhancing their battlefield coordination, drone operations, and artillery accuracy in Ukraine. The Washington Post has written an article on this saying the issue has renewed Ukrainian frustrations over Elon Musk. Some of the soldiers criticised Musk by name, saying his company has not done enough to crack down on illicit use, saying he appears to have favourable views towards Russia. You think? Absolutely. I'm so glad that the Ukrainian soldiers are saying this really overtly, because Musk needs to be called out. He has become, well, he hasn't become a puppet for Trump and Putin. I think he's possibly manipulating Trump. I think Trump has become a puppet of Elon Musk, but I think he is contingent upon natural resources in Russia and China to the point where he has to kowtow to the needs of Russia and China, and he does that with regard to the war in Ukraine, and it irritates the bejesus out of me. Really, really does. Next to reports on this as well. Washington Post notes that for a long time, one of the major advantages of the Ukrainian army was satellite internet via Starlink terminals. Now it's become available to the Russian military as well. They're accessing it illegally and using it to improve the coordination of attacks, increase the effectiveness of drone strikes and artillery. Right, there's been another air crash in Russia. An AN-3 AK Boris plane hit the ground in Yakutia, killing one passenger. Engine failure is being blamed. Total 5 people were on board, flying from Olekminsk to Zaporizhia. So, is there an issue with maintenance for planes given sanctions? Well, an Airbus A320 due to fly from Moscow to Vladikavkaz immediately returned to Domodedovo airport due to a, quote, malfunction sensor being activated. No one has said what the malfunction was, but the landing was safe and no one was injured. But it is another emergency landing in Moscow. So again, we keep an eye on aviation because of the sanctions. We know that there have been all sorts of issues over time. And finally, this. Now, it's not so much the story itself. So in Koronovsk in Krasnodar region, a nurse in a psychiatric hospital has been killed when the ceiling caved in. And as horrible as that is, it's this other claim, and I need to look into this, but Tim White says it's easy to look at the Kremlin's 23% cut in the health budget and say things like this are inevitable. Is that the case? I know that they've increased funding for the armed forces, and I assume that they are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and they are taking a lot of money out of the welfare state in places where the Russian population will much prefer that money was spent, but it's being spent on a war to assuage a dictator, a megalomaniacal dictator's narcissistic inclinations and desires. And so at some point, hopefully, the Russian population are going to say enough's enough. We don't want our money, but our tax being spent on this invasion into Ukraine. 23% cut in health budget is huge, right? In times where we have growing, aging populations that require more and more healthcare. Our health budgets are going up and up. To think that Russia is cutting the defense budget, health budget by 23% is incredible. Anyway, I need to look into that figure. But anyway, I thought I'd share that with you. Just a few notes. As you can tell, like Sunday morning for me has been fairly busy. I was a little bit slower just because of my injections and whatnot. A little bit ropey today. But yeah, I would normally be going to my son's rugby match on a Sunday morning. He, as a 14-year-old kid, he's an amazing sports kid. I have 2 twins, and one of them, he like football and his rugby. He's amazing. He was selected for the Southeast for rugby, and he's just the best number 9. Speaking to someone who said this other team, like, oh, is your team? That's a team with the quote the awesome number 9. I'm like, that's my son they're talking about, and he's just quit rugby. And he can't be bothered to do it anymore. And I'm like, so I didn't speak. I'm the child here. I didn't speak to him for a week. I'm like, I'm so angry with you. You are so amazing, and you've just quit rugby. I talk to you guys about him all the time in what he does, and having to go and watch him, which I love doing. And he's just quit it. And I'm just, of course, kids, do what you want, but sometimes you've got to push through and do things because you're bloody good at them. And yeah, anyway, so I'm gutted about that. For you guys, it means that Sunday mornings are going to be somewhat more consistent in terms of scheduling. But I'd much rather that wasn't the case. And anyway, I went to watch his football match yesterday because I refused to go and watch his football. I'm like, I'm not watching. You've annoyed me that much. I'm not watching your football. And then because I'm the big child here, right? I went and watched him yesterday, and he was amazing. But yeah, gutted. Children. Why do we have them? They give you all these hopes, and you have these aspirations for them, and they dash them. Probably because they want to play more on their PlayStation. Anyway, that's my whinging. But it means that I will probably have a little bit more consistency on a Sunday morning. Anyway, take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.